Welcome, everyone. Good day, good afternoon, good morning from wherever you're joining us from. We're very excited to participate in this webinar, a collaboration between UNCDF and Digital Frontiers Institute, and we've titled it Scaling Impact through Women in Digital Financial Services, Policy, Regulation, and Innovation in Action. It's a celebration of women. It's a celebration of gender intentional regulatory design. It's also a celebration of capacity building and two development sector parties coming together and investing in bringing capability for inclusive financial systems. I am going to start with our keynote. We have a panel of experts. We have practitioners from across the globe and in Africa. But I'll start by introducing Bram Peters from UNCDF to give us a keynote, and he's the program manager. So I'll hand over to you, Bram.
Thanks, Tariro. Good morning and afternoon or evening, wherever you are and listening in to this webinar. I'm really pleased that we have this, managed to compile an excellent panel and on a webinar jointly organized by DFI and UNCDF. We've had a long-standing partnership on this topic, so I'm really pleased that we can actually share some of these lessons. So when we talk about digital finance, I think too often many of us tend to focus on technology. Think of the algorithms, platforms, infrastructure, or sometimes even devices in your own hands. But this webinar, we want to highlight actually the human element that I believe truly drives the transformation in digital finance. And these are remarkable women who are not just participating in this whole, dare I say, revolution, but in many ways are actually the driving force behind many of the changes that we're seeing in the industry. So over the years, the many years that I've spent in this field, I've had the privilege of working alongside many, I dare say, extraordinary female colleagues who, consistently demonstrated that when you put women in a driving seat and you empowered them with the right tools and knowledge and also opportunities, they in many ways they don't just change their own careers, but they actually transform entire ecosystems. And for that reason, I want to take the opportunity to pay tribute to a few of them that I've worked with throughout the years. But at the same time, I also, that's at the risk of forgetting also quite a number that I've been working with. So by no means, this is not an exhaustive list, but just want to mention a few colleagues that I'm currently working with, such as Iris Kisiti in Malawi. Think of Jessica Masi in Rwanda, Manu Boulier in Gabon, Annette Kasabele, who I first worked with in East Africa, in Tanzania, and she's now leading our work in Fiji. But also someone like Maria Perdomo in the Asia-Pacific region. Then former colleagues like Delia Dean in Uganda, Sabine Menza, that many people actually, I dare say, know. She's quite a character, and I've loved working with her over the past couple of years. But also, from Finca, for instance, the CEO, Andre Simon, Mami Kalonda, and obviously also, of course, Temi, who is one of the panelists here. I've worked together with her in Finca Uganda alongside other very powerful women like Sibia in DRC back then, I think Joanne in Malawi and Grace in Tanzania. So to me, these are examples of very powerful voices that have not only changed my own understanding of digital finance, but I dare say that they've driven the very foundations of some of the inclusive digital finance ecosystems that we see today. So these are change makers who are actually taking what they've learned from the courses from DFI and apply those learnings in their own organizations and the markets that they are operating. They bring with that fresh perspectives and innovative solutions, and with that sometimes challenge the status quo, and they're creating more inclusive regulatory frameworks, building stronger financial institutions, and with that also ensuring that the digital finance truly serves everyone, and specifically those that have been traditionally excluded. And in today's conversation, I actually hope that we can hear some of the lessons and the learnings from the practitioners who are living and driving these transformations on a daily basis in their work. And as I would like to keep it short, and I would like to hand back to you, Tariro. But before that, I would like to propose not just the first question for the Q&A, but the final question for the Q&A at the end of this webinar, and that is, how can we, and that's to all the panelists, like how can we better support you in your work to amplify and scale it? Thank you.
Thank you, Bram, and thank you for that call out of exceptional women who inspire me, who are doing great things in inclusive finance. And it's just great to be in this webinar. And just for me to also give some welcoming remarks coming through from Digital Frontiers Institute, and just to celebrate this collaboration, which included the Policy Accelerator program, as well as the Digital Finance for Resilience program. Within that program, we distributed over 500 scholarship seats across regions, really across the globe. And some of the alumni here are here to tell their story from when they took the course to where they are now. They've really grown and championed a lot of initiatives in the markets. So we're looking forward to that. But just to say, Digital Frontiers, we see ourselves as a partner to the development sector, as the capacity building specialist partner to the development sector, and building those inclusive finance capabilities. And most of those scholarship seats were spread across, most of them taking electives within the regulatory track, including consumer protection, cybersecurity, and others really focusing on use cases, that affect the underserved customers in low to middle income countries, and that would include some SME finance. So these are some of the things that we're looking to hear from our panelists, from Digital Frontiers Institute alumni, from experts who've worked with the UNCDF, from development sector practitioners. And as we move into the panel, I'm going to allow them to sort of introduce themselves and give us some context around who they are, what they're doing now, and how they tie this celebration of capacity building, celebration of human capital, or the human element, like Bram put it across. And I am going to start with you, Nishani, because you're closest to me. Nishani Mohammed, can you please introduce yourself, and we'll move to the next.
Hi, everyone. Well, I would say good morning because I'm here speaking to you from Trinidad and Tobago. It is 8:09 a.m. here, so I was just telling the team that I am barely awake because it's also a public holiday. It's Republic Day here in Trinidad and Tobago. But I am Nishani Mohammed. I work with the National Payments and Innovation Company of Trinidad and Tobago. I am a financial sector transformation analyst, and we at NPICTT work very closely with the UNCDF. We do a lot of work surrounding fintech innovation, digital payments, and most importantly, financial inclusion. So a lot of my work would surround those areas. Through UNCDF, I would have been provided the opportunity based on they seeing the alignment with our work and the courses that DFI would have offered. So I would have done MSME financing and consumer protection. Especially the MSME financing would have contributed significantly to the projects and the initiatives that we embarked on at the MPICTT, which I will talk more about in a bit as we continue. So it's nice to be here. Let's get the conversation going.
Thank you, Nishani. And then I'll ask Sedania to introduce herself and tell us where you come in the mix.
Thank you, Triro. And I want to say I'm very honored to be here. And I'd like to thank UNCDF and DFI for organizing this webinar. I'm Sedania Namrud from Ethiopia. And I've spent the past 12 years of my experience working across the Ethiopian digital ecosystem in the public sector, private sector, in the non-profit organizations. My background spans cybersecurity management as well as digital inclusion and literacy. And during my time at the Ministry of Innovation and Technology, I served as the head of digital capacity building and public engagement unit. In 2022, I completed the certificate in digital money with DFI, which has been invaluable resource in shaping my perspectives in digital finance. Currently, I'm based in the US, in the San Francisco Bay Area, contributing to the global innovation and technology ecosystem. And I'm very excited to share some of my insights today with you. And it's 5 a.m. here, so bear with me. Thank you. Back to you.
Well, good morning, Sedania, and thank you for joining us and giving us that perspective, especially having worked in Ethiopia, doing all the work that you've done there. It's a priority country for digital frontiers, and I know a priority countries across the development sector. So looking forward to your contribution to the conversation. And then I'm going to move on to Ntanda.
Thanks, Terero. Good morning. My name is Ntanda Mandui. I identify as a storyteller. I'm from Malawi, presently based in the United States. Moved here in 2022 to work with the UNDP through the inaugural UNDP graduate program. I'm an entrepreneur and a digital transformation advocate. Spent the past decade building ecosystems. I'm the founder of Nta Foundation, Quata Collective, BN Corporation, and newly Q2 Corporation. And we've collectively impacted over 500,000 young people across the continent, 20 countries to be specific. We do digital skills training for innovation, and we have innovation hubs, 2 of them in Malawi, and we work in the creative economy space. Professionally, started my career with the UN as an intern with UN Women in Malawi. I went on to work with the Malawi government, the Malawi Revenue Authority as a tax collector, then eventually worked as a project manager for the World Bank through the Digital Malawi Project. And most recently, I have worked with Microsoft Xbox as a business development manager, where I led global expansion strategies, looking at new markets and regions. The heart of my mission is I believe in an autonomous Africa. I believe Africans should be able to lead their innovations and build systems that serve them. And I'm hoping that within our lifetime, not in the next, we can build systems, and especially with women, that can transform Africa. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ntanda. So much to learn here. I'm so excited that we've got such a great panel with us. And last, but certainly not least, I'm going to hand over to Temi to introduce herself. Go ahead, Temi.
Okay, so thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and pleasure listening to colleagues that spoke earlier. So I'm Temi Tokpe Akinfari. You can call me Temi for short. I currently head the Financial Inclusion Division within the Consumer Protection and Financial Inclusion Department. I work with the Central Bank of Nigeria, bit of a mixed background. Currently a regulator, I've been a regulator over the last 11 years, working with the Central Bank. But before then, I was majorly in the private sector, commercial banking, retail banking, and microfinance, where I met Bram when I worked in Finca, Uganda for a couple of years and led up the function of banking services, where we actually took on expansion of delivery channels and supporting the banking operations of the bank. majorly as the MFI transformed into a deposit-taking institution. And there was a need to really expand on digital channel strategy. So current portfolio, I had financial inclusion, the implementation of the National Financial Inclusion Strategy, which is very close to my heart. And of course, a major component of that portfolio is our gender inclusive finance that looks particularly at the women's segments, which also is close to my heart. The topic of women in leadership and how they advance inclusive regulation for policymaking is something that is very dear to my heart. For my interaction with the Digital Frontiers Institute, I've been a community of practice facilitator for West Africa and for some time for North Africa. And it's been a very interesting exchange, working with regulators across different countries and different regions, and seeing how they've been able to influence policy in their area. And of course, to facilitate an enabling space for the private sector innovators to bring on board, broader inclusion. So happy to be on the call today. Thank you.
Thank you, Timmy. And if I haven't introduced myself, and you know that I'm in good company, but my name is Tariro Nyumo, and I am the head of stakeholder engagement and fundraising at Digital Frontiers. I am also a women's economic empowerment enthusiast. I've been with Digital Frontiers for 6 years, and along my career, I've led the Certified Digital Finance Practitioner Program, where most of the courses that our experts have taken through the partnership with UNCDF and Digital Frontiers are held. It has that portfolio of courses. I am so excited to have this conversation with these top women, but I want us also to have like an interactive conversation with those who've joined us, our participants, so that when we get to the Q&A, which will come in later on, we manage to sort of give their feedback and their take on what's happening in their countries and what they see and how women are increasingly, shaping how inclusive financial systems are going to go as we move to a more digitized society. So we're going to start with the panel discussion, and then we'll move into the Q&A. And for my first question, it's really an in your country question, and also to kind of find out how you've contributed since you have got the skilling and you have risen in your career. Now, how have you contributed to policy shifts? So I'm going to frame it like this. In your country, what regulatory or policy shifts have you observed as a result of gender intentional capacity building? And how have you personally contributed to advancing some of the changes that you've seen? I'll start with you, Nishani.
Yes, I'm seeing the trend there. I definitely am the first one to speak. So I would say from the perspective of Trinidad and Tobago, with my knowledge that I would have gained from DFI, I think one of the most important things I was able to appreciate is the fact that there is a global trend that exists, especially when it speaks towards MSMEs, as well as individuals in terms of the lack of trust and awareness in adopting digital financial solutions. We would have seen that here in Trinidad and Tobago as well, when we conducted our National Financial Inclusion Strategy, right? A core group that we would have focused on are the MSMEs, the micro, small, and medium enterprises. And very interestingly enough, through my DFI course, it was very interactive. I would have seen that the trends exist globally in terms of the fact that MSMEs face a large financing gap, the barriers and the challenges that they experience when it comes to accessing digital financial services or just formal financial services on the whole. They often encounter a lot of friction when it comes to documentation, record keeping, and then we have the issue of MSMEs themselves not having the requirements to adopt digital financial solutions in their businesses. So this has limited MSMEs globally, but we've seen it pretty much the same here in Trinidad and Tobago. We've seen that 77% of MSMEs here in Trinidad and Tobago do not have access to a business bank account, which is a key enabler of them adopting digital financial solutions in their business, right? So I guess from this, from my experience and from my learnings of DFI, as Bram would have said earlier, it's very important, especially when we're speaking towards MSMEs, that our DFS interventions are people-centric. So, like, for example, through the DFI course, we would have learned about, Apollo in Kenya, where they would have gone straight to the farms and meet farmers in terms of, obtaining their information. They would have allowed for alternative credit scoring and things like this, like alternative credit scoring, meeting these small businesses or these entrepreneurs, these MSMEs, where they are, is a key step in achieving an enabling environment for them to thrive and contribute to economic growth. Before I stop here, I would say that DFI has allowed me to play a big role in terms of advocacy. We at the NPI CTT, we have, through our survey, identified these gaps. Especially, we've seen that there is a lot of intervention that is required to bring MSMEs into the formal financial ecosystem. So we have embarked on consultations and on workshops to provide digital financial literacy to MSMEs, and most importantly, provide assisted banking services. What this means is that we basically speak to, we collaborate with financial institutions, and we bring them in our space together with MSMEs to ensure that, we not only provide the knowledge on how to get them into the formal financial system, but at this stage, we realize that it is crucial to do that hand-holding process, in a sense, and walk them through the entire thing. Yeah. We would have also done sessions like this for not only MSMEs, but for youths, and a group that is very dear to me, which is the differently able. So our financial inclusion initiatives, they align very well with the work that the UNCDF and DFI, aims to accomplish.
Thank you, Nashani. So I remember when we were giving scholarship seats to the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States as a region, and it's so good to kind of hear how it's happening in Trinidad and Tobago, and some of the things that the African continent is also grappling with. We see it happening in your country as well. And just to say that the MSME finance course is a really, really great one. And I remember for most of the time, it was led by Elizabeth Friend, who is such a great subject matter expert, and would really sort of like get into detail the history of the financing gap, alternative scoring methods, and looking at how different MSMEs are defined or how they are stratified within different countries and why that matters, and all the data sources and the stakeholders that have been working in these, which I'm sure that you're also working with. But thank you for giving us that context and taking us through what your organization and how you have been working through the challenges that women who make up most of the informal sector and trying to strengthen that market. Okay, thank you, Nishani. I'm going to move to you, Tidania, and ask the same question about in your country, the regulatory and policy shifts. What have you observed and how have you contributed to the changes? So go ahead.
Thank you, Chiro. So in Ethiopia, over the last few years, we've made a real progress towards building a more inclusive digital financial ecosystem. One of the most shift has been at the National Bank of Ethiopia, which now requires financial institutions to collect 6 disaggregated data and under the National Financial Inclusion Strategy, which is the second version now. This is critical because for so long, policies were being developed without a clear picture of how women and men are actually engaged in the financial services space. Alongside that, we've seen other national strategies come to play. One of them is the digital transformation strategy, which I have worked closely to implement, that helped liberalize the telecom industry, and that led to a significant progress in the mobile money market. The other is the National Digital Payments Strategy, and the other one I want to mention is the National Digital ID Initiative, which makes it easier for people to access services through unique identification and facilitate the KYC process in financial institutions. And in addition to this, there is a broader economic reform going on in Ethiopia, like the opening up of the country to capital markets and to various financial institutions, even from abroad. And we are beginning to see a healthy competition that will further expand access to financial services for women and underrepresented communities. On a personal level, my DFI training gave me both technical and a practical experience that I have implemented in my in my day-to-day activity. For example, I have initiated the National Digital Inclusion Strategy, worked on the design of the National Digital and Financial Literacy Survey, which will be published soon. And we worked with UNCDF to make that happen. That, for the first time, gave us a nationwide baseline on access, usage, and gender gaps. I also helped design the Digital and Financial Literacy Project, which will be launched soon with multimedia contents that will be delivered through the digital platform and traditional media platforms such as a radio, so that women in rural communities are even people who doesn't have the literacy that they need to, they can benefit from the contents. So Ethiopia is moving forward with stronger regulation, better data practices, and new literacy initiatives. And my role was and has been to help connect policy with practical delivery. Thank you.
Dania, that is quite amazing. You participating in all those initiatives that are really bringing women to participate in formal financial services. I mean, from literacy program to digital identity. I mean, identity is a big thing at scale. Knowing the numbers that Ethiopia is working with, it's quite a challenge, and it's so good to hear that there are women championing this in Ethiopia. So well done to you, and looking forward to hearing more. I am going to move to yet another trailblazer amongst all the people that we've been speaking to, and that's Ntanda. Tanda, I mean, the policy shifts, your contribution, women entrepreneurs. Can you share more details within the Malawi context?
Absolutely, Terero. So I have worked in the digital space, I can say, since, well, quote unquote, 2013. I started out as a digital creator. I was a blogger, and within that, other young people wanted to do the similar work. So they were like, how can I also contribute to the digital landscape? So that's how I set up my foundation, the entire foundation. And initially, I wanted to just train 30 young people. That was my capacity at the time. I was lucky enough that at the time, I wanted to start this. The World Bank had also come into Malawi, and we're starting with the Digital Malawi project. And they were looking to work with innovation hubs. So this was on the policy side. The policy was created. I think Malawi received $72 million from the World Bank to fast track digital enablement in Malawi. $2 million of that $2 million of that 72 million was supposed to go towards digital skills training and entrepreneurship training for young Malawians. And they were going to do this through innovation hubs in Malawi. So they were looking to work with 8 innovation hubs. At the time that they came into Malawi, they were there were only 5 hubs existent in Malawi. So they wanted to work with other people that could set up hubs in Malawi. So it so happened that I was already doing that work. So they asked if I could set up a hub. So I think in the first tranche of that grant, I was the only one that was setting up a hub from scratch. I think a few more have been set up since. So we've trained so far upwards of 10,000 people in longer form trainings, and our impact exceeds in the 500,000 plus through our workshops and all. In terms of the policy side, well, when I got the grant, because I didn't know too much about what I was doing, so I enrolled in my first master's. So I did a Master of Science in Entrepreneurship, Digital Transformation to be specific. And my thesis was on the creation and also adoption of information management systems, financial services being one of them. So MACRA at the moment, the Malawi Communications Regulatory Authority, is working on a digital innovation bill. I don't know if that bill has been passed, but there have been a lot of consultative meetings of how we can better support creators and people that are adopting these systems. So we have the Universal Service Fund, I believe. And as of this year, they are just funding digital content creators again to digitize Malawi. And this is something that I've advocated for. For me, the biggest part was that when I Google my country, the biggest stories I'm finding are corruption or what is bad about Malawi. And I was like, not everything is bad about Malawi. So how do we talk about the entrepreneurs that are thriving, the good stories that are coming out of here? Because if we start to see ourselves positively, then we can do more work. And the Digital Frontiers Institute, of course, it's been a minute for me. So I did the training, I think, in 2022. For me, the biggest part was also just affirming that I belong in this space, because I had a huge imposter syndrome when I first got into the tech space. I'm an economist by background. So when I got into tech, I felt like I didn't belong. And the workshops like this were very impactful for me to see myself as a woman that belonged in tech. And I think the Digital Malawi project was specifically unique because one of the targets was to train 60% women. That was one of our goals, that we have to train 60% women. And some of the hubs were struggling to get women to apply. My hub did not struggle because we actually had 75% of applications were women. And for me, one of the key findings there was, why are women finding it easier to apply to our hub? The simple fact that the hub was led by a woman meant that other women could see themselves in that space. So we did not struggle with getting more women to apply for that. So I'll obviously share more about what we do, but in summary, that is where Malawi is. And I think there's a lot more that we can do for Malawi. Thank you.
Thank you, Ntanda. Such inspiration. I mean, talking about digital Malawi and specifically youth and entrepreneurship and digital skills, those are some of the things that the entire development sector is still focusing on. Big players like the World Bank, Mastercard Foundation, they all have this inclination to something that you championed a long time ago. So well done to you, and so glad to have you on the panel. And then coming to yet another powerhouse, Temi, as the regulator in-house and giving us that Nigerian context and even across the region continent. Can you share with us some of the policy shifts and what you see personally?
Yeah, thank you very much, Tyra. I think for me, it's been quite impactful, engaging in this space, particularly working with women leaders across, of course, my country, Nigeria, and opportunities to actually share knowledge across the region. Now, one of the key policy shifts that we begin to see when it comes to inclusive financing is around agent banking, for example. Now, in my country, we've had a number of my colleagues from the central bank that have actually undertaken the DFI courses, majorly the Digital Financial Inclusion Supervision course. that's really sort of, built their capacity around, policy making, and then looking at supervisory tools. One thing we've continued to see is the agent network in Nigeria, for example, is growing. And growing, extensively. We came from a very recent past where our services were very brick and mortar, and then digital services were growing out. But the complexity of my country is also the beauty of the country. In the length and breadth of the country, we can't entirely have brick and mortar to serve the people. So the agent network is something that is very critical to our strategy in Nigeria. Now, a policy key shift that we've started to take on is to strengthen that space. And very recently, the central bank released a circular around enhancing the security of the agent network. Now, two key things I'd like to point out in this area. One is introducing geofencing around the agent network. Geocoordinate for the terminal itself and for the person transacting. So you really assure that there's a very strong audit trail in terms of the financial services that are being conducted on the agent network. Now, that's one policy shift that we're starting to see. The second is also in terms of better enhancing the identity of the agents, providers. Okay. And this is important for us. And I'll tie that very soon to one of the key pillars that came out very strongly from the DFI course. And that's a pillar for inclusion. So one key thing that I personally took away from the interaction in the community of practice and working with regulators in that space is the SIP framework. So the SIP framework looks at four key things, four key pillars, I'll say. One is inclusion, the other is stability. The third, I believe, is integrity. And the final pillar is protection. So protection, of course, very critical. Now, I mentioned earlier that my primary mandate is financial inclusion. I head the National Secretariat for the Financial Inclusion Strategy. Our focus is to bring on board, many more participants into the financial system. But we know that that is only half of the job. So it's not enough to just bring in the people and then they get, maltreated or they have a financial loss or an experience that sort of makes them to lose confidence in the system. What you're going to find is people begin to self-exclude or they begin to stop using the services and then, they generally leave the financial system. So for that reason, the protection pillar is very critical. Now, one other policy shift, well, not a policy shift, it's more of a structural shift to sort of strengthen, the policy oversight that the central bank does. Very recently, the central bank enhanced, the function within the CBN. So for a very long time, we've had a consumer protection department. Now, in the last 3 months, that function has been merged now with consumer protection. So the mandate of my department now is a twin mandate. So it's consumer protection and financial inclusion, because we see a very strong linkage between inclusion and on the other hand, we want to be sure that when they come into the system, they have confidence and they can stay. Because when they stay, then the financial system can grow. So that is one area that we begin to see that we are seeing some shifts. Now, looking at the ecosystem in itself, the community of practice, a number of learnings that came across in that interaction. Now, a number of participants went on to support policy development in their space. One around open banking, which also has been implemented in Nigeria now. The policy is out. We also have similar developments in other markets in Africa. The other area is around the regulatory sandbox as well. We have a cohort in incubation that we're also working with in Nigeria and some other implementation in other markets. One key area that was also critical to all the participants was, I think, because I mentioned this earlier as well, is around the issue of gender disaggregated data. And that's a component of narrowing down to, the gender components of inclusion. Now, this is critical because without data, you cannot really, either to adapt a policy or bring on board a new policy and then provide an enabling environment for the service providers to innovate. Now, what have we done in Nigeria in terms of the data? Last year, going on to a year now, November of last year, we actually signed up to a global code for the We Finance code. The We Finance code is the Women Entrepreneur Finance Initiative. And in that code, the focus is very critical on women entrepreneurship and data. So 3 key comments to do, in the space is around women in leadership. That's the first thing, because women need to have a voice in the room to influence policy. So women in leadership is one pillar. The other pillar is around data insights. So that's where gender disaggregated data comes in. The third pillar is then around action for the ecosystem. For the policymaker, the action could be a policy adaptation or a policy enactment. For the service provider, it could be a product design. It could be enhancing, the share portfolio that you're giving to women. So those 3 things together, are sort of interrelated. I think I'll end with one other key learning from the community of practice. Now, what we started to do before, a while back actually, was we facilitated a number of peer knowledge exchanges within the community itself. Because we found that even though the countries were different, but some of the challenges we're experiencing were very similar. And then we found that there were countries that were more advanced in their implementation than others. So they were able to bring on board their learnings, their experiences, their challenges, and then pass that on to colleagues in that community of practice. And then we instituted what we call the COP impact stories. So the impact stories essentially is, what has worked in your jurisdiction? What can be passed on to other areas in the country? I think I'll pause for now. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Temi. And sorry that we're having a bit of a connection issue. So if it works better for you, you can even move the camera so we can actually hear some of the great things that you're saying. You're highlighting the consumer protection, Asian networks, and just how a lot of policy shifts have been happening in Nigeria, and also bringing to the fore the Digital Financial Inclusion Supervision Program that you were a facilitator of, and the key learnings from there. Just to note that we do have a phase 2 of the Digital Financial Inclusion Supervision Program, which is specifically for supervisors within the banking sector and how they use that lens, including having a women's financial inclusion lens to their supervision. So looking forward to more of impact within low to middle income countries and certain priority countries where we are really enhancing that capability for inclusive supervision. So thank you for that. I think what I'm going to do is in the next round, we're going to have short answers. So we move into a more interactive section with the participants. And I just wanted to hear more from our experts because they have so much to say from different countries around what's happening in their country, or some new nuggets that they can share with us. And I'll come back to you, Nishani, and your passion for MSME finance in Trinidad and Tobago. And just in your view, you mentioned the financing gap and the unmet demand for credit. So in your view, what are some of the key barriers that you see that make this gap so wide? How are women experiencing, how are MSME or women-led MSMEs experiencing these barriers that make them not get the finance they need to scale?
Right. So basically, the more or less the same barriers that men face, pretty much the same as women. But from our National Financial Inclusion Survey, what we would have seen is that women are prone to experience more challenges compared to men when it came to accessing formal financial services. And this is mainly due to the onerous documentation required by financial institutions, as well as we've seen some cases where women are claiming that they do not have the funds to maintain their personal accounts, right? Now, normally women in Trinidad and Tobago, I know yesterday we would have spoke a little bit about, some types of the informal services. And in Trinidad and Tobago, we have something called a susu. So we've seen instances where women resort to informal financial, I would say, systems, because due to lack of trust and familiarity with persons, they would have resorted to alternative financing mechanisms, right? I believe, however, that in order for us to achieve a very enabling environment, especially for women here in Trinidad and Tobago, women MSMEs included, we need to, governmental support is key. That is as simple as I'm going to say it. Governmental support is key in terms of driving initiatives, programs, and projects, realizing the gaps that we would have seen from our survey and drafting strategies to move forward. So, for example, how can we in Trinidad and Tobago, with collaboration, incentivize financial institutions to offer low-tier business accounts with simplified documentation to encourage women and encourage MSMEs to access these services. In addition to that, one of the areas that I often see experts speak about when it comes to MSMEs is the fact that they are not tailored products and services that exist in the market for MSMEs. So how can we, through financial technology, promote and pilot alternative solutions that can work for MSMEs? And most importantly, what I hold very dear to me, and I think will create the most impact, especially immediately, is the use of digital financial literacy to increase awareness and to build trust, especially, as we speak today about, gender-focused capacity building. How can we improve digital financial literacy amongst women? Piloting initiatives and projects that are gender-focused to allow these women and allow MSMEs to gain access to the formal financial ecosystem.
Thank you, Nishani. Yeah, and I heard you say government contribution and trust, digital literacy, and just the move to formalization. I think it's very important for the women that we're talking to really understand the benefit of formalizing, from moving from the informal to the formal. And if there is no trust and if you're not confident in maybe the digital tools that the government is offering, as we, the story of DPI and everybody's moving around, putting these rails in place, and then you don't feel confident, it won't serve the reduction of the MSME finance gap. But thank you for that.
Exactly. And in addition to that, I believe that, as women deserve that space in the formal financial ecosystem because it could give them opportunities to, empower themselves and to build their businesses and to be part of that economic growth that we, also often speak about.
Yes. Thank you, Nishani. And I'm going to move on to Dania. And I know that you mentioned that there's a lot of initiatives that in Ethiopia has spearheaded, but the implementation side of it is still something that you think we need to work on. Can you explain further what you want us to understand in this context?
Yes. So I think this is the most important question for Ethiopia. We have strong policies and regulations, not only in digital finance, but in the digital space and in other spaces. But the main challenge is turning them into reality and actually implementing them on the ground. So I see three main challenges when it comes to implementation, particularly in digital finance. So the first is capacity gaps. Along the line of what my other colleagues on the panel have mentioned, capacity building is very important, but we don't have yet enough skilled professionals, especially women, to drive reforms forward. Policies can only work if the people implementing them are equipped and empowered. The second is coordination. Nishani mentioned earlier that the government should involve more and make sure that the private sector is supported. So coordination between public, private, and nonprofit institutions and developmental organizations is very critical. we have reforms like the digital payment strategy and the economic liberalization, but the implementation is often fragmented, as I mentioned earlier. The third is trust and awareness. Even where services exist, women in particular in the rural areas face digital literacy gaps and affordability issues and cultural barriers. So policies on paper don't always translate to usage on the ground. That's what I observed throughout my experience. For example, the National Bank of Ethiopia has a directive that banks must have at least 2 women on their boards, with the broader target of 25% women in senior management. This is a bold step that pushes institutions to take women's leadership seriously. When women are part of the decision-making process, products and policies are more responsive to women clients, and putting women in the driver's seat helps to actually create the reality that they want. But representation alone is not enough in my eyes. So we need to pair these with mandates on mentorship and incentives so that women leaders can influence meaningfully. And the private sector, I think, must be engaged early, because real inclusion should be built into the business model, into their missions. So while the mandate is a big step forward, and the regulatory frameworks are the right step to the right direction, but the real opportunity is to combine it with capacity building, private sector alignment, and making inclusion both genuine and sustainable. Back to you, Trero.
Absolutely. And it's a good thing to bring women to the table to have the seats to make the decisions, but we also need to strengthen their networks. Like the network that we have here, we could call it like a community of practice. If we keep on coming together and sharing these ideas and lifting each other up and learning from each other, we need those networks to be strong just as much as men, I would say, pull themselves up in their networks. We're not there. But going back to somebody who is a woman entrepreneur who pulled up other women and is really including, has at the intersection of both policy and entrepreneurship. I'm going to ask you, Ntanda, what you think are some of the policy enablers sitting in both worlds that really can enable us to have the inclusive growth or inclusive financial systems or inclusive digital economies as we go forward.
Thanks for that, Tariro. And I think it is quite unique to be able to see both sides of the equation. So I think the most transformative part of my journey for me was working with the UNDP Independent Evaluation Office and analyzing policies that we have across the African continent. But more specifically, I was able to contribute to the Independent Country Program Evaluation for Malawi. So it was so unique because at the time I was the UNDP here in New York, we were doing the Country Program Evaluation for Malawi. And one of the key findings we found actually was that Malawi is extremely policy rich. So extremely policy rich, but implementation poor. So when actually here at HQ, it's known that if you need a policy, Malawi has got it. We are so good at creating incredible documents. So if I'm going to speak for my country specifically, I would not say that we need more policies, and not to say that we do not need the policies, but the fact is that we have them. So I think the need in a case for a country like Malawi is how are we enabling young people to implement? And implementation now looks like being empowered. I mean, capacity development is a big part, and I think that's the work that we get to do. So how do we empower the young people to want to see themselves as doers? Because for a long time, and I'm going to go back a little bit into colonization and a bit of the colonization mindset, I can say, for most young Malawians, we have been beaten down into this space where we feel like things must be done for us, things must be given to us. So if we need a road, we're thinking, okay, who is going to fund this road for us? We've not really understood the economics. So like I live in America now, and I was in Washington working with Microsoft, and you look at Redmond City, all of Redmond City, the whole entire city was built by Microsoft ideally. When you look at, I live in Michigan. When you look at Michigan, when people look at economies here in the US, it's Michigan makes cars, so Ford. So we're looking at Ford. Ford makes cars. You know, we're looking at, I mean, like even Manhattan here as a financial capital. So each city has an industry. When we're looking at our African cities, our cities are government entities. We're not producing much. Again, I'm speaking specifically to my country, but maybe this also translates to other countries. So for me, when we're looking at policy enablement, we must create policies that enable Africans, young Africans, to become doers, become creators, and to be able to do more, because we have gotten into a space where it almost becomes a check. So it's, oh, we need to create a policy for digital innovation. Oh, they are funding gender now, so we're going to create a policy for gender. Or it's more like, where is the money? And not the money for the country. It's how can I get the money into my pocket to build my house, to get the next luxurious car. And if our focus is at that short term, we're doing it at the expense of Africa. So for me, I'm looking at policy. I'm like, how do we create policies? And I mean, capacity development is a big part. I teach at the Michigan State University College of Engineering, and I also teach at the Malawi University of Science and Tech. And the difference in the students is so jarring, not because Malawians are any less smart, but because our education system is very archaic. So like even something as simple as that, I teach both somehow still virtually, even though the students at MSU are with me in person, we still meet virtually. Something as simple as jumping on a Teams or a Zoom call. My MSU students, if a class is at 8, by 7:58, they're already logged in and they're ready to go. My Malawian students, you're going to have at least 15 minutes of my network is not working. This is not working. And it's little things like that for me, which I'm like, this is an expense. So how do we build the capacity at length for young Africans to start seeing themselves as doers? And then we really need to do, I'm really, really passionate about how can we transform Africa within, for me, the next 20 years. I can pause there for now, Tarira.
Hey, thank you. Temi, I'm going to move into the Q&A, and I see that you've already started answering that question from Felix, so that we can be more interactive. So Felix was asking, how can regulators and policymakers ensure that women professionals are trained under the DFS for race are empowered not only to participate, but to lead in shaping a more inclusive and resilient digital financial ecosystems? Temi, can you answer that whilst I look at the next question?
Okay, thank you very much. I was actually just typing a response, so I'll just jump on the response. I think for me, it's important to have high-level sponsorship. And what do I mean by that? I mean, you can be all good by yourself as a woman leader, but if you do not have the opportunity to actually showcase that knowledge, that expertise, there's a limit to how you can really advance in conversation. So sponsorship is important within organization. So it means that even at the highest level of management, the conversation around, gender and the importance of having women leaders at the table should be really, really promoted and sustained. So, and beyond the sponsorship, I think mentorship is also important. So there's a technical skill of the job that you can learn, but there are some other things that are not, they go beyond the technical, right? It's more around the soft skill, how to manage conversation, how to, handle issues, handle yourself. So mentorship is critical because that is what's really sort of smoothing the edges and prepares you as a competent leader, to take up your space, in conversation. And it's for DFS, but it is not limited to DFS. I think it's general to policymaking. I've been a policymaker for the last 11 years of my career, and I can tell you that when conversations around policy come up, there are different opinions, there are different perspectives. And sometimes you have this really brilliant idea, but if you're not able to sort of make your voice heard, that idea could be subsumed by some other ideas that may not really, serve the purpose. So it's important to, continue to build capacity. I mean, prepare yourself for the opportunity you're seeking, but it's also important to take mentorship. And I don't think anybody is above learning. I mean, I've grown to a certain career, to a certain stage in my career. But I tell you this, I take every opportunity to learn from those I believe, they are better suited in some other tables that I would love to be. So continue to learn, and by all means, speak up. Yeah.
Thank you, Timmy. I see we're getting a lot of questions, and thank you for that to our participants. I'm going to ask Sidinia to respond to Rika. Rika is asking about safeguarding in financial services, so against fraud. And yeah, so how do you see it maybe from an Ethiopian context and maybe in general in comparison to the developed world? Sidinia.
So I would say two things. So the first one is in terms of regulation, we have ratified the Personal Data Protection Proclamation this year, which I believe will contribute to the protection of consumer data. That would translate into, consumer protection, or at least give the guardrails and a bit of a base to consumer protection. The other thing I want to mention is in terms of safety. I think coming from a background of cybersecurity management as well, I feel like awareness and knowing what to do if you are, let's say, using a mobile money app and you've received like a phone call and someone tried to take your information, or but in general, awareness and knowing your rights is very important. So I think we have to invest heavily on the regulation side, but at the same time, training and empowering consumers to protect their own data and how to navigate the digital finance ecosystem as safely as possible.
Sidinia, thank you. So there's a question from Jessica and Esperance, and I think Jessica, I'm going to ask Nishani maybe to comment on private sector in Trinidad and Tobago, and if there are any private sector involvement in helping inclusive financial systems, and how do you see it? Also, how private sector maybe is interacting with the small businesses and those led by women. Maybe we can start thinking of that. And I would like Ntanda to start thinking of social norms. You already started differentiating about students in one region and in Malawi and how that affects everything. So Nishani, can you comment on the involvement of private sector in your country?
Sure. So for example, we would have seen with earlier I would have mentioned our financial inclusion efforts with the differently abled. We would have seen, interest, as we would have noticed that it is an underserved population. We would have reached out, or we would have seen that this private sector organizations, there are many private sector organizations within this population that actually had interest in financial inclusion efforts. Apart from, that focus would have been on financial inclusion, we would have seen a lot of interest in terms of financial technology and the enablement of, alternative payment methods and the exploration of alternative payment methods. You've seen from a lot of fintechs, the willingness to want to develop, new products and services that are not only that do not only point citizens to commercial banking institutions. So mostly we would have seen, because we do a lot of work in terms of digital payments and government services, but from a private sector point of view, we would have seen interest in our financial inclusion, initiatives, especially with the assisted banking services and digital financial literacy, as well as, the exploration of financial technology to move away from traditional payment methods.
Thank you, Nishani. I think, yeah, very important, the involvement of fintech and banking institutions in providing that alternative data, or just looking into the innovation that can sort of be able to score the SMEs. Yeah. Ntanda, on social norms and culture?
Absolutely. Happy to speak a little bit to that. So I think I shared before that I'm a storyteller at heart and I write. And I recently just published my second book. It's titled Feminine Silence, and it's about gendered expectations. And I think about like women's empowerment. So when I did my undergrad in economics, my research was on the socioeconomic impacts of empowering women. And the data in Malawi is quite unique. So when you're a woman in Malawi, naturally you are celebrated if you're doing incredible things. My mother was the first female inland captain of Africa. And for me, like growing up, I believed that women had to be powerhouses. Everywhere I went, it was, oh, you're Loni's daughter. And she was deeply celebrated. So when people talk about like women's empowerment, for example, I say Malawi is a unique case because Malawians maybe can tell me if I'm wrong here. But when you are doing incredible work in Malawi, and I can speak for myself, you're deeply celebrated in the country. Now, my data found, especially we were looking at we still have a national gender wage gap. So it was like, okay, if women are celebrated when they're in leadership, what's happening? Why are women earning less than everybody else? So we found that women were concentrated, even though when they get into senior positions, they're paid more. Women are concentrated in low-paying jobs. So now it becomes a situation of, yes, if you get into leadership, you will earn more. So we do not have the man-to-woman gender wage gap. But women are now doing nursing jobs, and these are important jobs. But when we have all the women concentrated in nursing jobs, in teaching jobs, then we find that now we have a national wage gap where women are not aspiring to or getting into leadership. So for me, and again, you guys can speak on it, but I always say about like, I think what we know about like gendered expectations and women's empowerment, a lot of it came from colonization because we had to see ourselves through the lens of how they saw women. Now, we've always seen, and I can't speak for other African countries, but Malawi generally celebrates women. I grew up in a space where the chiefs are women. So like I grew up in a space where all the women were firehouses. So for me, I'm like, when we speak about cultural norms and social expectations, how do we go back to ourselves, what we are as Africans at the heart of us? So how do we go back to that? And then for that, of course, we have to do, it's a lot of systemic undoing. And I'm writing another book series because I think there's a lot to be said about everything. So I'll be publishing about 7 books about international development. And the heart of that starts at, we need education reform. I speak of, again, the Malawian education system. Our education system, yes, it's being reformed, but it's still very archaic. It's what white people brought to us and gave to us to say, you know what, here's your education system. When you analyze that education system was made to create clerks that would serve the colonizers. For as long as we're just doing masters of public administration to go and manage the donor funds, Africa will not thrive and develop. So we must not change when I am 30, as I am now. We must change the mindset from the children. And I think Asia did an incredible job at this. So Asia, I mean, when I was growing up, I don't know if you ever heard about it, but there were nuances about how Asia, specifically China, is abusing the children. The children are learning too much. They're napping in classrooms. But you look at the impact 20 years down the line, they have a workforce that is incredible. Their economy is rivaling with America. So how can we do the same for Africa? How do we educate the next generation? We do not start when they're 20 and we're doing capacity development program. How do we move the capacity development to when they're 5 years old? So we're clear that, okay, we want you guys to be these people when you're 30. So how do we reform the education system to start now for the generation that is going to be 30 when we're 60, when we're 70 years old? So we have a different Africa. So I think for me, the biggest part is systemic transformation. And I think we start deeply at education reform. Thank you, Tarira.
Thank you, Ntanda. And I always say that, when we're educating our children, because these are the children who are going to be negotiating with children from China. So we really need to empower our children so that they can speak and that they can negotiate on our behalf and have better deals on the African continent. But we've run out of time, and I saw that there's a question on traditional structures, and I'm assuming you're talking about things like savings groups across the continent, across low to middle income countries. I think these are some of the things that financial services have tried to tap on or to use those social structures and try and make them inclusive or link them to the traditional financial services. So I hope we can discuss that later. We really have run out of time and our panel has been very generous. Thank you for everything that we've shared. It's good to know that capacity building or equipping women really is a big step into transformation of our countries, transformation into more inclusive systems, more inclusive growth, and in general, better economies. I mean, contribution to the GDP. Nishani, you were talking about the contribution of MSMEs onto GDP and how that improves the economy in general. It's researched, it's correct. There's a business case when we invest in women. And so I'm just going to ask, since I have already taken enough of your time, I need final comments from each of you. Bram asked us a question at the beginning: what would you change? So briefly, maybe say something in conclusion and relate to something you would change in your country. I'll start with you, Nishani, again.
So I would definitely say, you know, we have a lot of work to do. In terms of private sector and public sector collaboration, that is obviously very necessary. That's one. Two, in terms of designing our products and services, you know, make it more people-centric. There should be a lot more outreach programs, especially for underserved populations. And, you know, Bram would have asked initially what is something that we could do to provide, you know, to achieve the environment that we need. You know, us here at the NPIC-TT, we have been, you know, great beneficiaries of the technical expertise that UNCDF would have provided in terms of, you know, conducting our survey, understanding financial inclusion in Trinidad and Tobago, and assessing the way forward in terms of some of the gaps that we would have seen. I, for one, am very grateful for the opportunity, you know, to get access to these courses, to learn, to see the trends globally. And I think moving forward, you know, having that technical expertise as we continue to develop projects and programs, as well as, you know, I definitely look forward to being exposed to more opportunities via the UN, as well as through Digital Frontiers Institute, to facilitate my capacity building, as well as for capacity building amongst my peers, women, and, you know, for the greater good of understanding and promoting digital financial solutions.
Absolutely, Nishani. We're here to support you in any way we can. Zidania, your last comment.
Thank you. So before I go to Bram's question, two things about emerging technology. There was a question in the comment section: emerging technology and the digital financial sector. So I would want to say we have to be very cognizant of the emerging technology and how it can affect women's inclusion, because I've learned about a research about AI and how it's amplifying the gender digital divide. And I think we have to be very careful when we integrate or when we so I believe emerging technology can be a great opportunity to springboard or to actually create a level playing field. However, it's a double-edged sword, and we have to be very careful in when implementing that. Saying that, what can DFI and UNCDF and such partners can do to support us? So I would say, going back to my previous comment about capacity building and creating collaboration, I think these are the two main areas that we, I feel like, need the most help. Not help, but we need to collaborate. Those are the two areas. I feel like in terms of collaboration, I think development partners have a neutral background, so they can, you know, bridge that gap, I would say. And the global experience, lastly, the global experience is also important to bring that to local markets. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So you spoke about technology and AI. There's a lot of learning that we still need to do, especially from a regulatory point of view. I mean, technology is good, but if we regulate, we need the regulation in place so that we don't amplify the gap, like you say. So looking forward to building capacity in AI. I'm going to move to Tanda.
Thanks, Darrell. I think I want to continue the conversation on AI because I'm also joining BBC just after this to speak about AI and youth and jobs on the African continent. And having worked inside Microsoft and spoken to engineers within Microsoft, they're a lot more pessimistic, or if you look at it as optimistic, I don't know, but they're a lot more pessimistic about the impact that AI is going to have on the world. And speaking from, I mean, these are senior engineers within Microsoft, and most of them are telling me, like, I don't know why you are doing an MBA at the moment, because there are going to be no jobs in the next few years. We don't even know if jobs will still be a thing in the way that you think about them by the time you graduate. And I think we need to have a longer, and I wish I had more time to speak on it, but we need to have a serious conversation around that. So it's not just about the gendered impact, but the global impact, because most of them are senior engineers, but most of them are saying, I've not written a single line of code this year because I did not need to. AI can do that. All I'm doing is reviewing. Now, if AI is coding at that level with Claude, with ChatGPT, and that's the most complex mathematics that you can get, at least in that way, quantum physics and all of that. So how do we empower? And again, we speak of like digital frontiers. For me, what I would want to see is digital frontiers not just being a capacity development program, but quite literally deeply embedded in the education system. So we are training our young people not as a reactionary or afterthought thing that we do, but that it's embedded from the front and from the beginning. So we start, like, the digital skills education must go to the foundation. And I think on the optimistic side, I'm very optimistic about the opportunity AI would be for Africa, because I think the impact the West will have in terms of AI will be very different from what we have. Everything has kind of, quote unquote, been done in the West. So when you're looking at the impact on jobs, yes, a lot of jobs will be automated because the systems exist. I think this is a unique opportunity for Africa because we can actually create systems. We do not have a lot of systems. AI helps us do things faster. I can speak of my own innovation hubs. To do the Digital Malawi project, I needed about 30 people to work with me to implement this project. Right now, I have 3 staff members, and we do way more work than we ever needed to do. Than we ever could do with even 30 people, and it's even more streamlined, and because it's less people. With that level of efficiency, how can we achieve more for Africa? And I think somebody did speak on the comments, and I just want to speak on that. They say that I spoke mostly on systems and policies because, unfortunately, that's the level at which I work in. But do check out my books. I think they'll be good to get deeper into some of those things. And in terms of the last question that Bram had, which is, what does support look like? I think we need, again, I'll just look it back to, we need to empower young Africans to see themselves, to grow up seeing themselves as doers. And again, right now in this space, it looks like spotlighting the doers. So bring them front and center, make them visible, because unfortunately, what I've seen with most people is they see themselves by seeing other people. I could see myself as a woman that could become a powerhouse because my mother was a powerhouse. And I think when we had the EU in Malawi, they did a celebration of Malawi's 16 power women. And he said just during that night that, having had a conversation with each of you, and I was the only one under 40, I think, said every single one of you, you're a 2nd generation powerhouse. So you are here because your mother was amazing and you could see that you could become. So how do we change in terms of role modeling and visibility so other people can see that, because for me, if I look at, like, I was at Xbox is led by a Black woman, Sarah Bond, and I look up to her. But by seeing a Black woman being president of Xbox, I think I can too. So how do we role model, or how do we better position Africans to see themselves as people that can transform their land? Thank you.
It's networks, right? It's seeing yourself in other people. So yeah, really, we need those networks. Temi, a final comment?
Yes.
I've taken so much time. Yeah.
No, very short comments. I see Esperance comments in the chat, and she's talking about social norms within households and communities, and the market that women play as economic actors. And Esperance, I totally agree with you. I think this is still a reality we deal with. We can't run away from it. So I think my one word on that will be, let's recognize it for what it is. It's still a reality we deal with. True, in some markets, some changes, there's more awareness now around gender norms, and then adapting and then making sure that you're giving equal opportunities, both to male and female. Now, let's celebrate the progress that is being made, but let's also recognize that the challenges still exist. So my charge will be, as individuals, we're all change agents. So within our circle of influence, continue to spread the message and advocate. So final points on that will be, how do we also unlearn, gender norms that are not, furthering the cause that we are trying to, take further. So we need to unlearn, and as we unlearn, we need to also learn, the right attitude, the right practices, the right systems, to do the right, to do right by policymaking and, in the environment we find ourselves as decision makers. So unlearn, learn, and also relearn. That would be my final word on that point. And to Bram's comments, what can we do better together? Let's continue to support the capacity building, because for me, I think knowledge is the way forward, really. There's something new to learn every day. So let's keep open minds. Let's continue to support the capacity building. But beyond the capacity building opportunities, it will also be good to have some in-country implementation with partners. I mean, we'll be willing to have bilateral conversation what that looks like. And as we do that as well, let's continue to spread the impact stories. You know, what is working well, not just what is not working. Sometimes we focus on what is not there. But there are times there are some positives that are really within our work together. So let's share the impact stories. Thank you.
Thank you. Bram, you can close for us.
Well, what more to say? I think we're already over time, so I've heard quite a number of very inspiring comments, and yeah, I think also to some of the speakers here, I think consider these women the powerhouse and take them as examples. I actually will reach out to one or two of the panelists to speak to my daughter, because I think they really are good, really good examples that and I think and if they can be a good example to anyone else, and as Tanda said, like, she had a mother that really was a good example to her. I think maybe one of you can also be a good example to my daughter. So thanks for that. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being generous. And thank you to our participant who've stayed on. Have a great day further. And thanks for the conversation. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.